May 1945, Bavaria, Germany. The surrender ceremony had been completely routine. General Major Friedrich Hauser, commander of the 22nd Infantry Division, standing at the processing table. His division, what remained of it, stood in formation behind him, 2,000 men. Patton's entire staff present, American soldiers watching. Hauser had been signing documents for 20 minutes, cooperating completely, professionally, correctly. Then an American officer approached from the side of the field. He handed Hauser a document. Hauser read it. His hands went completely still. He read it a second time. Then he looked up. He looked at Patton. And he screamed, not raised his voice, not spoke sharply, screamed at the top of his lungs in German, in front of 2,000 of his own soldiers, in front of every American officer present, in front of Patton. He screamed for 90 seconds. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody tried to stop him. And Patton stood completely still, arms at his sides, expression unchanged, not angry, not defensive, not reaching for authority, just standing there, letting it happen. When Hauser finally stopped, his entire body was shaking. The field was completely silent. Then Patton spoke, and he spoke so quietly that the officers closest to him had to lean in to hear. Subscribe before we continue. We tell the stories nobody else tells. To understand what was in that document, you need to understand who Friedrich Hauser was. He was 52 years old. Born in a small town outside Stuttgart, his father had been a teacher. His mother had played piano in the local church. He had a wife named Elsa, married since 1921, 24 years, 2 sons. Karl the elder was 23. He had served in the German army since 1941. Franz the younger was 19. He had been conscripted in January 1945, same month as Klaus Werner, the 17-year-old who had cried in Patton's formation 2 weeks earlier. Hauser had spent the last 4 months of the war not knowing where either of his sons was. Communication had broken down completely in the final collapse. No letters, no word through official channels, nothing. He had commanded his division through the final retreat through Germany, carrying that silence every day, not knowing. He had told himself they were prisoners somewhere, American sector. That was good. American prisoners were treated correctly. They would be processed. They would come home eventually. He had told himself this every morning when he woke up, every night when he tried to sleep. The document the American officer handed him that morning contained the answer to 4 months of not knowing both sons. Karl had died in the fighting near Nuremberg in April 1945, 3 weeks before the surrender. Franz had died in a field hospital outside Munich 2 weeks before the surrender, both of them gone. While Hauser was 300 kilometers away, signing surrender documents and cooperating and being professional and doing everything correctly. He read the document twice. Then he looked at Patton. And everything that had been held together by 4 months of professional necessity came apart. He screamed for 90 seconds. The interpreter didn't translate. Nobody asked him to. Everyone present understood that what was happening didn't require translation. When it stopped, the silence was the loudest thing any of them had ever heard. And then Patton spoke. Patton spoke quietly. So quietly that his aide, who was standing 6 feet away, said later he had to read Patton's lips to catch the first sentence. He said, "How old were they?" Hauser was still shaking. His interpreter translated. Hauser looked at him. 23. And 19. Patton was quiet. What were their names? Hauser blinked. Karl and Franz. Patton nodded. He didn't say anything for a long moment. The 2,000 soldiers in formation were watching in complete silence. Every American officer was watching. Patton looked at the document in Hauser's hand. Then he said, "Where are they buried?" Hauser looked at the document. His interpreter helped him. Karl near Nuremberg. Franz outside Munich. Both American military cemeteries pending permanent placement. Patton looked at his aide. "Get the exact locations." Both graves. His aide wrote it down. Patton looked back at Hauser. "When this processing is complete, before you are transferred to holding, we will take you to see them." Hauser stared at him. Both of them. The interpreter translated. Hauser said nothing. He was looking at Patton the way you look at something you don't understand. Like the words were in a language he thought he knew but suddenly didn't. Patton continued. "Not because you deserve it. Not as a gesture of sympathy," he paused, "because they were soldiers, and they died in this war. And their fathers should be able to stand at their graves." Hauser's jaw was working. He was trying to say something. Patton waited. Finally, Hauser said through the interpreter, "Why? Just that. Why?" Patton answered immediately, "Because I have sons too." He said it without emotion, without performance, as a plain statement of fact. "Because I know what it is to send men into something they might not come back from." He looked at Hauser steadily. "Your sons didn't choose this war, neither did mine." He picked up the processing documents. "None of our sons chose any of this." He handed them back to the processing officer. Continue. He walked back to his position. Hauser stood at the table for a long moment, not moving, not speaking. His 2,000 soldiers watching him. Then he picked up the pen and signed. 2 days later, Patton personally arranged transport for Friedrich Hauser to visit both graves. 2 American soldiers accompanied him, not as guards, as escorts. The visits took most of the day, Nuremberg first. Then Munich. Hauser spent 40 minutes at Karl's grave, 20 minutes at Franz's. Nobody recorded what he said. Nobody was close enough to hear. The 2 American soldiers who had accompanied him stood at a respectful distance and waited. When Hauser was done at the second grave, he walked back to the vehicle. He didn't speak on the return journey. When he arrived back at the processing facility, he asked to see Patton. Patton was available. Hauser was brought in. He sat across from Patton, and he said one thing, in German. The interpreter translated, "Thank you." Patton looked at him, said nothing for a moment. Then, how old was Franz? 19. Patton was quiet. My son George was 22 when he flew his first combat mission. He paused. I know what I felt every time I received a report from the air sector. He looked at Hauser. I understand more of what you felt standing in that field than I showed. Hauser looked at him. Then why didn't you react? When I screamed. Patton considered this. Because you weren't screaming at me. Hauser waited. You were screaming at everything that put you in that field with that document in your hand. He paused. I was just the person standing in front of you when it came out. The right response to that isn't to get louder. Hauser said nothing for a long time. Then, my men were watching. Patton nodded, I know. And they watched their general lose control completely. Patton looked at him. They watched their general receive the worst news of his life and respond like a human being. He paused. That's not nothing. Hauser looked at his hands. I've spent 30 years teaching my soldiers that a commander doesn't break. Patton said, a commander who has never broken has never been given what you were given this morning. He stood up. Your men didn't lose respect for you when you screamed. He moved toward the door. They lost something else. The illusion that command protects you from what it costs. He stopped at the door. That's a better thing to lose. Friedrich Hauser was held as a prisoner of war until October 1946. He returned to Stuttgart. His wife Elsa was waiting. She had known about both sons for 3 months. She had not known how to tell him. They sat in the kitchen of their partially damaged house, and she told him everything she knew. He listened. He didn't scream. He didn't have anything left to scream with. He wept quietly for about an hour. Then he got up and made them both coffee, because there was nothing else to do, and life continued anyway. And coffee was something he knew how to make. He worked for the rest of his life in civil administration, land records, planning documents, methodical and careful. He never spoke publicly about the war. One thing his wife mentioned in an interview given after his death in 1978. She said, he came back different from the man who left. Not worse, just different. She thought about it. He was quieter, more patient. With me, with the children of the neighbors, with anyone who was carrying something. I asked him once where that came from. He said, a man showed me that the right response to someone screaming isn't to get louder. She paused. I never knew what he meant, but he meant it, whatever it was. He meant it. Patton's aide wrote about the incident in his private memoir published in 1962. He wrote, I have never understood how Patton stood in that field for 90 seconds while a German general screamed at him and didn't move. Not the authority, not the discipline, something else. He thought about it. I think he understood something the rest of us didn't. That the screaming had nothing to do with him, and that the only honest response to grief expressing itself as rage is to stand still and let it finish. And then speak quietly. He paused in the memoir. I've tried to do that a few times since. It's harder than it looks. If you had been Patton, would you have stayed quiet? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about who Patton really was, subscribe. You're in Patton's army now.